I never thought that another room order from a 52-year-old man could change my life like that. Usually, at his age, they're in the routine of their business, always a bit distant and mechanical, but this time, something felt different. As I stood by the door, holding a tray with expensive champagne, a fruit basket, and a collection of gourmet snacks, I could already feel the air inside the suite shift. I worked room service at a 5-star hotel, and most of the guests, especially the older ones, tended to be brief, polite, and wrapped up in their own world. But him? Mr. Jason Miller, a businessman I'd never met before, was different. The suite was immaculate, with sleek modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. When I knocked on the door, I expected the usual, a quick tip and a silent departure. What I wasn't expecting was for him to open the door himself, smile warmly, and invite me in like we were old friends. "Come on in," he said, his voice deep and calm, a softness to it that I didn't expect from someone with his reputation. As I entered the room, I couldn't help but feel a strange connection, something I couldn't put into words. He wasn't exactly handsome in the traditional sense, too old, too refined, but there was a certain grace to him. He had a presence that immediately put me at ease. The way he looked at me, those kind, dark eyes, made me feel like I mattered, even though I was just the guy delivering his dinner. He didn't rush me, didn't treat me like a servant. Instead, he watched me closely, like he was studying every detail of my movements. I tried to shake off the awkward feeling building in my chest. It was just a room service delivery, after all. But I couldn't help it, there was something about the way he spoke to me that made my pulse quicken. "Would you like to stay for a drink?" he asked, catching me off guard. I hesitated, unsure of the etiquette. "I should be going, sir," I said, though I couldn't quite meet his eyes. He chuckled softly, the sound rich and comforting. "Please, call me Jason," he said, stepping closer to the small bar area in the corner of the room. "You're doing a great job." "I insist." And just like that, I was standing there, holding a glass of wine with him, in the quiet solitude of his luxurious hotel suite. This wasn't like any other room service delivery I'd ever done. Something was different, but I didn't know what yet. We sat at the small table by the window, the city light sparkling beneath us as Jason poured another glass of wine, his hand steady and deliberate. I couldn't help but notice the way he moved, so confident, yet there was a softness to it that caught me off guard. He wasn't the kind of person I'd usually have a conversation with, much less sit down and share a drink, but the tension in the air made me feel like I'd been invited into a completely new world. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a hotel employee, I was someone he wanted to be around. "So, tell me about yourself," Jason said, his eyes focused on me in a way that felt intense, but not invasive. "How long have you been working here?" I was taken aback. The other guests rarely showed any real interest in me beyond the service I provided. They were polite, but they never really cared to ask personal questions. Here, in this moment, Jason was genuinely curious. "A few years now," I answered, taking a sip of the wine, trying to calm the nervous energy that was slowly creeping up. "It's a job, you know? I do the usual, breakfasts, dinners, the occasional room service delivery. Not much to say." Jason smiled, leaning back in his chair, his gaze never leaving me. "It sounds like more than that. You're here, working in a place like this, interacting with people like me. There must be something special about you to stand out." I felt my face flush at the compliment, unsure of how to respond. But his words stuck with me. I hadn't expected to be seen this way, to be regarded with genuine respect. It felt new, refreshing, even. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to suppress the sudden fluttering in my chest. I wasn't used to feeling like this, not about a guest, not about anyone. The conversation continued, flowing more easily than I anticipated. Jason asked questions, and I answered, finding myself sharing things I wouldn't normally tell a stranger. We laughed, relaxed into each other's company, and before I knew it, time seemed to slip away. But as the night deepened, so did the tension. I could feel it in the space between us, thick and palpable, as if we were both aware of something unspoken. Something we were both hesitant to acknowledge. When I stood up to leave, he caught my wrist gently, his touch warm and reassuring. "Stay a little longer," he murmured, his voice soft but firm, with a hint of something I couldn't quite place. "There's no rush." I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Every part of me wanted to stay, to linger in the moment, but I was afraid. Afraid of crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Jason was older, more experienced, and I was just a guy doing his job. But as I looked into his eyes, something inside me shifted. Maybe this wasn't just about the job anymore. "Just a little longer," I found myself saying, before I even had time to think about it. He smiled, his fingers still lightly grazing my wrist as I sat back down. The moment felt suspended, like everything around us had blurred, and all that mattered was the space between us. We sat there in silence for a few moments, both of us unsure of what to say next. The wine had relaxed us, but it also made everything feel more charged, as if every glance, every breath, carried more weight than it should have. I caught myself staring at him more than I intended, noticing the way his shirt clung to his frame, the way his eyes seemed to study me with a quiet intensity. It wasn't just the usual polite interaction. There was something more between us, something unspoken. "Why do you do it?" Jason's voice broke the silence, his question unexpected. "Why work here, in this world of luxury and routine? You could be doing so much more." I wasn't sure how to answer. It wasn't a question I'd ever considered, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was something comforting about the predictability of my life, something safe. But Jason made me question that. He made me feel like there was more to life than the simple routines I followed every day. "I don't really know," I replied, my voice quieter than usual. "Maybe it's just easy. Simple." Jason studied me for a moment, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "It doesn't seem like you want to be simple," he said, his tone soft but deliberate. "You're more than that." I felt a warmth spread through me at his words, a sense of being seen that I'd never felt before. It was strange. Jason, this successful, worldly man, was looking at me in a way that made me feel like I mattered. Like I was important. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this moment than just a conversation. Without thinking, I reached for my glass of wine, my hand trembling slightly. The connection between us was undeniable, but it was also terrifying. I wasn't used to being the object of someone's attention, especially someone like Jason. But I couldn't deny the pull. I wanted more. Jason leaned forward, his gaze never leaving mine. "You don't have to be simple. You can be anything you want." I swallowed hard, feeling the space between us closing. "What do you mean by that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, slowly walking over to the window. His presence felt even more commanding from a distance, and I couldn't help but follow his movements. When he turned back to me, the look in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. "I mean that I see you, and I know there's more to you than just this job," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. "You're not like the others, and I'm not like the others. We don't have to be." Before I could respond, Jason took a step toward me, his hand gently resting on my shoulder. The touch was light, but it sent a rush of warmth through my body, and I felt my heart race. His fingers traced down my arm, sending sparks across my skin. My breath caught in my throat, unsure of what was happening, but at the same time, I didn't want to pull away. Jason's gaze softened, his thumb brushing over the back of my hand as if testing the waters. "I don't want you to be scared," he murmured. "It's just us here. No one else matters." I wasn't sure how to respond, but all of a sudden, everything felt so close, so intimate. I could feel the heat radiating off him, and my body was reacting in ways I couldn't control. Every part of me wanted to lean into him, to close the distance between us. And then, he leaned in just slightly, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered, "Can I kiss you?" I froze, my mind racing, but my body wasn't listening. There was a quiet intensity in his voice, something that told me this wasn't just about physical attraction. He wanted something deeper, something real. The way he looked at me, with such tenderness, made it impossible to say no. Yes, I found myself whispering, barely able to believe the words as they left my lips. Jason smiled softly, his fingers now gently cupping my chin, guiding my face toward his. His lips brushed against mine for the first time, soft and hesitant, as though he was waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back, slowly at first, testing the waters, and then more urgently, the kiss deepening as the tension between us finally broke. I could feel his hand sliding to my waist, pulling me closer, and my heart was pounding in my chest. The kiss was gentle, yet it was loaded with all the emotions I'd been hiding, all the desire I'd been afraid to admit. I could feel him, feel the warmth of his body pressing against mine. He wasn't rushing me, wasn't forcing anything. It was as if we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. But now, it felt natural, inevitable. As we pulled away slightly, both of us breathing heavily, I could see the same confusion mirrored in his eyes. "We don't have to figure everything out right now," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. I nodded, my hands trembling as I reached up to touch his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my fingers. "I want this," I said, my voice barely audible. The words hung in the air between us, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside the suite could have disappeared, and it wouldn't have changed a thing. The moments after our kiss hung between us like a dream. I could still feel the heat of his lips on mine, the softness, the urgency, as if we both needed this connection more than we were willing to admit. But as much as I wanted to stay in the moment, reality came crashing back. We were two people from entirely different worlds. I was just a 27-year-old guy working room service at a luxury hotel, and he was Jason Miller, a 52-year-old millionaire who probably had everything figured out. Jason pulled back slightly, his fingers still resting lightly on my arm. His touch was soothing, as if he was grounding me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I wasn't alone. But the reality of the situation settled in, and I had to pull myself together. "I shouldn't have done that," I murmured, looking away, feeling the weight of my words. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Jason's finger gently lifted my chin, guiding my face back to his. "You don't need to apologize," he said, his voice firm but tender. "Neither of us needs to apologize for anything. We're both here, and we both feel this." The way he said it made me feel like everything would be okay. Like this wasn't some mistake, but rather something that was supposed to happen. But the fear still gnawed at me. What did this mean for us? Was it just a fleeting moment, a one-time thing? Or was there something deeper here? I was too afraid to ask those questions, to confront the uncertainty that was creeping into my mind. But Jason didn't give me the chance. Instead, he reached for my hand, gently pulling me closer again. "Let's not rush anything," he whispered, brushing his lips against my forehead. "Let's just see where this goes." I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I felt comforted by it. Jason wasn't pressuring me, wasn't expecting me to have all the answers. He was letting me figure this out in my own time, and for once, I didn't feel like I was being judged. We sat there in silence for a while, just holding each other, allowing the weight of everything to sink in. I had never imagined that a simple room service delivery would lead to something like this, something that felt so real, so intense, and yet so fragile at the same time. And then, just as I thought the moment was over, Jason's voice broke the silence again. "I won't lie," he said, his words slow, measured. "I want more from this. I want to see where this could go, with you." His words hit me like a tidal wave. I had never thought of myself as someone worthy of the kind of attention Jason was giving me, and yet here we were, sharing this intimate moment. My heart was racing, my thoughts spinning, but in the midst of all that chaos, I knew one thing: I didn't want to walk away from this. I didn't want to let fear stop me from exploring whatever this was between us. I feel the same, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I don't know what it means, but I want to see where it goes too. Jason smiled, and for the first time that night, it felt like everything clicked. Then let's figure it out together, he whispered, his lips brushing mine again, this time with more certainty. I kissed him back, my hands moving to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. I could feel the warmth of his body against mine, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else: the hotel, the job, the fear. All that mattered was him, and the way we fit together in that moment. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it felt right. The days following that night felt like a blur. Every time I saw Jason, a rush of anticipation surged through me. We continued with our lives, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. A new, hidden layer had been added to our connection, and it was becoming harder to ignore. Whenever our eyes met, there was a tension that wasn't there before, a quiet acknowledgement that things had changed between us. At work, I found myself counting the minutes until I'd see him again, even though I knew I couldn't let it show. I had to maintain the professionalism I'd always prided myself on, but inside, it was hard to keep the walls up. Jason, however, was different. He was composed, his demeanor calm and collected, but there was a softness in his gaze that he reserved only for me. It made everything feel more intimate, like we shared a secret no one else could understand. One evening, after delivering dinner to his suite once again, Jason asked me to stay. It wasn't a request, not really, it was a quiet command, and I found myself unable to refuse. I walked into the room, my heart racing, wondering if this was going to be just another night of lingering touches and soft conversations, or if this was the night things would change again. Jason greeted me with a smile, and as soon as I stepped into the suite, he closed the door behind me, his hand lingering on the knob longer than necessary. I turned to face him, and before I could say anything, he stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming. The air between us felt charged, as if something was about to shift. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes searching mine. The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. Happiness seemed like such a distant thing to me, something I hadn't really thought about in a while. But being here with him, in this moment, felt different. I felt like I was allowed to be more than just the guy bringing room service. I could be me, someone who wanted something more, something real. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice quiet. "But I think I'm starting to figure it out." Jason smiled softly, his hand brushing against mine. "Good. I've been thinking about this a lot," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability. "About us. I don't want to rush anything, but I want to make sure we're both on the same page." I felt my heart skip a beat. "What does that mean for us?" I asked, suddenly unsure of what he wanted. My mind raced with possibilities, but I couldn't find the words to express what I was feeling. Jason stepped closer, his hand gently cupping my cheek. "It means that I care about you," he said, his thumb brushing across my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. "And I want to explore this. Whatever it is. Together." The simplicity of his words hit me hard, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It wasn't just about the physical connection we shared, it was about the deeper bond that was growing between us, one that I hadn't been expecting, but one I couldn't deny. Without saying another word, Jason leaned in, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was both tender and filled with an undeniable urgency. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I could feel the heat between us, the need to close the distance between our bodies. As his fingers brushed the side of my neck, sending shivers through me, I knew that this was more than just a passing moment. I kissed him back with everything I had, my hands tangling in his shirt, pulling him closer, as if I couldn't get enough. Every part of me was awake, alive, responding to him in ways I didn't fully understand. But it felt right. It felt like we were finally allowing ourselves to experience something that had been building between us from the very beginning. We broke apart briefly, both of us breathing heavily, and I looked up into his eyes. "I don't want to mess this up," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "You won't," Jason said softly, his thumb brushing across my lips. "We're in this together, remember?" I nodded, the weight of his words settling deep within me. This wasn't just about the physical attraction anymore. It was about trust. About building something real, something that wasn't just a fleeting moment in time. And as Jason kissed me again, I knew that no matter what happened next, we'd face it together. The following days were a whirlwind of quiet moments and stolen glances. Every time I saw Jason, it felt like the world around us faded into the background. The hotel, the guests, the routine, it all became insignificant compared to the space we occupied together. But with every passing day, the question of what this meant for us loomed larger. We hadn't talked about it openly, but I could feel the unspoken tension growing between us. There was an undeniable connection, but was it something we could really turn into more? Could I, a 27-year-old room service attendant, ever really be enough for someone like Jason? Jason, for his part, never seemed to waver. He was steady, reassuring, and kind. Every touch, every word, felt like he was trying to make me feel seen, like he was committed to whatever we were building. But I couldn't help the nagging doubt that crept in at night when I lay awake, wondering if this was just a passing fancy for him, something he would eventually grow tired of. One evening, after yet another quiet dinner together in his suite, Jason turned to me, his expression more serious than usual. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft but filled with intent. "About us. And where this is going." I felt my heart race, my pulse quickening in anticipation. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and longing for at the same time. Was he about to tell me that this was just a fling? That it was over before it had even truly started? "I don't want you to feel like you're just a moment for me," he continued, his hand gently resting on mine. "Because you're not. I care about you. More than I've cared about anyone in a long time. And I know this is complicated, there's a lot we're both afraid of. But I don't want to hide anymore. Not from you. Not from anyone." The words hit me like a wave. I didn't know what to say at first. My emotions were a jumble of relief, fear, and something else I couldn't quite name. "You mean, you want this? Us?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jason nodded, his hand gently caressing the back of my hand. "Yes. I want you. I've wanted this, even before I knew it was you." I felt the weight of his words settle deep inside me, a mixture of warmth and uncertainty. But the warmth won out, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was real. "I want this too," I whispered, feeling my heart swell as I spoke the words I hadn't fully allowed myself to acknowledge. "But what happens now?" Jason's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. "We take it one day at a time," he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to trust each other." And in that moment, as I looked into his eyes, I knew that I was ready to trust him. To trust us. As if sensing my thoughts, Jason leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was filled with more than just physical desire. It was a kiss that spoke of promises, of new beginnings, and of the possibility of something deeper. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, as if he wanted to erase any distance between us. And I let him. I wanted him to. Every inch of my body responded to his touch, and I kissed him back with everything I had, pouring all my emotions into that single, intimate moment. As we pulled away, our foreheads resting against each other, I knew that things were about to get more complicated. But in that moment, I didn't care. I was no longer afraid of what the future held. Because whatever it was, I was ready to face it with Jason by my side. Things had changed between us, there was no denying that. What started as a simple, unexpected room service delivery had blossomed into something neither of us could have anticipated. But now, as I stood next to Jason in his suite, looking out at the city that had once felt so overwhelming, I realized that this wasn't just a passing moment. This was real. We had both spent so much time questioning what this was, what it meant for us. And yet, despite all the fear and uncertainty, we had found something worth fighting for. I had found something worth fighting for. Jason had become more than just a wealthy, older man. He was someone who saw me, understood me, and made me feel valued in ways I never thought possible. "You okay?" Jason asked, his voice soft, concerned as he stepped closer, his hand gently resting on my shoulder. I nodded, my heart swelling in my chest. "Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this," I said, my voice full of honesty. "I've never been in a situation like this before." Jason chuckled softly, his breath warm against the side of my face. "Neither have I," he admitted. "But that's the beauty of it. We're figuring it out together." His words grounded me, reminding me that we didn't need all the answers. We didn't need to know what the future held. All we needed was to trust in what we had right now. And right now, it felt like we had everything we needed in that room. "I'm glad it's you," I whispered, turning to face him, my hand gently resting on his chest. Jason's eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of everything around us disappeared. "I'm glad it's you too," he said, his voice full of conviction. I closed the distance between us, kissing him softly, letting everything I had built up over the past few weeks pour into that one moment. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was just us, finding solace in each other's arms, trusting in the bond we had created, and accepting whatever came next. As we pulled away, Jason smiled, his hand slipping into mine. "We've got this," he said, his eyes filled with a quiet confidence. "Together." And in that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whether it was the outside world or our own fears, we would face them together. It didn't matter that I was 27 and he was 52. It didn't matter that I worked room service and he ran an empire. All that mattered was that we had found something real. And as long as we were willing to hold on to it, we could make it through anything. I squeezed his hand, my heart full as I looked into his eyes. "Yeah, we do," I said softly, knowing that this was just the beginning of our journey together. We didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, I felt certain about one thing: I was exactly where I was supposed to be.